Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Kepler Conversation. I'm Joffrey Swait. I'm the academic advisor at Kepler, and I'm here once again with Dr. Robert Woods. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure being with you, Joffrey.
Yeah, we've had the opportunity to converse a few times over the past year. And to share some of our philosophy and some of your educational philosophy with the world and with the Kepler audience. I'd love to hear how this first year of Kepler has gone. We're doing something pretty distinct, and so how has that gone for you? For us,
well,
really?
Everything I'm hearing from the folks that I interact with, whether it's parents who have children at Kepler or staff, teachers, people who are doing the wonderful things they're doing, I'm hearing great things. I think the number one thing I'm most impressed by and what I keep hearing is the extreme variety that we offer for the online folks, the classical Christ-centered education, whether it be in math or science, history, literature, philosophy, humanities, social sciences. The range offering is impressive. It's very impressive. And then being able to meet the educational needs of the families where they are, wherever they are, and their pace and the opportunities that they have, the interactions, it's both robust and very engaging. And so hearing great things.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear it. It's been the same experience for me. A lot of very happy families. And that certainly makes the job a lot more fun for me. Now, you kind of come at it from some sort of a different angle. You talk about the variety of classes. Well, a lot of the reason that exists is that there's a variety of teachers, right? We have this big stable of independent teachers. They come from different backgrounds, and most of the work that you do with us involves adults. Teachers and other adults. Can you talk a little bit? We'll go into detail with some of your stuff later, but I'd love to kind of hear about why are you passionate about working with grown-ups?
Well, it is the recurring phrase that I hear from good people, and I've heard over the years, and that is they really wish they could get the education, or they could have received the education that their children are now receiving in classical Christian schooling. And so what we've done is we've tried our very best to provide a sampling of that of sorts, whether it be through the certification program or what we're doing with our micro courses, those offerings that are their occasional periodical offerings. And then we have upcoming in the fall, starting in September, will be our certification programs, our certification track offerings that should be appealing to a range of parents or educators in classical Christian schools.
Yeah. So we'll talk about the micro courses and including one on Cicero, on friendship, and on old age that's coming up soon. We'll talk about the teacher certification track. There's already information scrolling below. But before we get into those, that could be like a teaser for the grown-ups in our audience. When we look at your biography on the Kepler website, one of the things that you emphasize, as you give your testimony and how you gave your life to Christ, what your background and your Christian walk is, you talk about your teaching philosophy. But one of the things you mention is what C.S. Lewis described as mere Christianity, and you say you're passionately committed to it. Could you explain what mere Christianity, what you mean when you take that phrase, mere Christianity?
Sure, absolutely. What I understand Lewis was trying to say, and he was not speaking in reductionistic terms or in simplistic terms, or trying to say the top three or top two doctrines within Christendom. What Lewis meant, and where he received that quote from, and I think how it is primarily used among Christians within Christianity today, is that it's what others call the consensus fideium. That is the consensus of God's faithful people through the ages. If you look at any part of Christendom or any aspect within Christianity or any particular camp, you're going to find some distinctives theologically, philosophically, when it comes to worship, liturgy, you're going to find some distinctives. But if you look at the big picture of Christianity and you look at those core truths of Christendom, those that have been emphasized by God's faithful men and women, not only in the Western tradition, but within Eastern Christianity, within the African tradition, within Latin America, if you look, you'll see a kind of consensus about what really matters, what's at the heart and the core. And for me, in a divided, often Christendom, and certainly in a horrendously divided world, I was drawn very much to the truth that there are particular truths that we all who are Orthodox, large O, little o, can agree on, that we would affirm things about the person of Christ, the very nature of God, the nature of the church, the nature of Scripture, a very high view of sacred Scripture. Those kinds of truths are the things that I believe we're talking about when we look at the heart and soul of mere Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, C.S. Lewis was an enthusiastic philologist and not one to let ancient meanings go. You know, mere Christianity, the word mere shouldn't simply mean simply right, or only. Right? In a sense, it means quintessential. Right, the core, the most. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think you hit the nail on the head, that the idea there is what is essential Christianity, or quintessentially the Christian faith, and what binds those who are committed followers of Christ, what binds those people together, even in different communities with different liturgies and different points of emphasis within the Christian faith. They're still bound together by these essential aspects of the faith.
Yeah. Well, you know, you work with educators, you prepare, you equip educators, Christian educators, and you know, that's a very obviously something that connects directly to building the kingdom, right? Because you know, you are ministering in such a way that you're helping families raise the next generation and then the following generation of the people of Christ. Now, so that's wonderful. But then I wonder if in these difficult times that we live in, with the challenges that we have, if a call for focusing on, shouldn't we be battening down the hatches?
Well, what's fascinating is I was in a conversation with a group of Christian intellectuals recently, and we were talking about this very issue. You know, what is a strategy in the moment we live in? And for those who hold the view that, much like the Roman Empire, just before its collapse, just before the barbarians invaded, what was the church doing? What were Christians doing? And there's a general agreement that Christians were going about living as God's kingdom people in a pagan culture and a fallen world that was, for all intents and purposes, literally falling around them, collapsing around them. And I do believe the image of Christians in the catacombs, or later on, a century or so later, Christians, the monastic traditions that had these communities of faithful people who are living out their faith, who are striving to please the Lord in their day-to-day walk. They were in the world, but not of the world. I think that particular way of thinking, that way of living, that being a faithful presence in the world, even in terms of offering classical Christ-centered education as our students leave the world. We often think, and I hear people say sometimes, well, you know, you're sheltering or you're isolating. I don't believe you have to be in a school for very long, even a classical Christian school for long, to see that our students are not isolated from the world. They are still very much, unfortunately, all too often, part of the world and very much influenced by it. We're trying to do within a classical Christian school environment what the image that makes the most sense to me is we're trying to inoculate our students. We're trying to prepare them for living and being God's faithful presence in the world. But we're not doing that by throwing them out into the world now, ill prepared. We're trying to prepare them. We're seeking to help cultivate godly character, godly way of wisdom and eloquence, so that they can be a faithful presence in the world we live in.
Mm. Yeah, and so you're talking now about students that Christian adults work with as they prepare them for adulthood. You have some courses that are actually designed for parents. So parents who are educating their own children, or
Right.
just grown-ups, I suppose. You don't have to even be a parent. But I'd love to, before you kind of unpack this latest micro course that is coming up. It's July 13th, I believe, is the first meeting.
Yes.
So before we unpack this course itself, maybe you could talk a little bit about this opportunity and then the importance of grown-ups continuing to educate themselves, or continuing to be in an environment where they can be educated even as they go into their 30s, 40s, and beyond.
Sure, absolutely. I think what we're trying to do here with Kepler and the offerings that we're providing through, whether it be the micro course or the certification, is to provide that opportunity for continuing or ongoing education that most of us who truly love learning, and we talk about living a life of learning, or schools often say, classical Christian schools will say, we're trying our best to cultivate a spirit and a disposition where students want to be lifelong learners. And I'm of the position, and I'm in that camp that strongly affirms that people who want to teach classical and a classical Christ-centered way should always be learning. And we live in such a beautiful moment. I mean, such a great moment in terms of classical Christ-centered education. The opportunities to continue to learn about Christian classical learning, they're abundant. The opportunities are all over the place. Great resources that are always coming out from great classical Christian publishing companies. Opportunities such as what Kepler offers. And what we're trying to do in the micro course is to provide an opportunity, a venue where instead of saying, all right, everybody, let's get together for the next 15 weeks or 30 weeks and let's study Tolstoy, or let's read something by Dostoevsky. Let's spend 7 months in Crime and Punishment. And that's a great thing. But what I have found for a lot of adults who are educating their own children or who are working 40 to 50 hours a week, it is better to offer what some people refer to as gateway readings. These shorter, rich, deep, meaty, insightful offerings, such as Cicero on friendship and Cicero on old age. And so we've been offering different micro courses for the last several months. We did something that was quite delightful, Boethius Consolation of Philosophy. We tackled C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. And so the plan is we'll offer these readings, make certain that people have plenty of time to read them in advance. And then we get together and we have a conversation, a great books conversation on these shorter readings, hopefully for the edification, the spiritual and intellectual edification of those who participate. And so far, I personally have benefited tremendously from the micro course offerings we've been providing.
Well, that's when you know you're doing a good job as a teacher, is when you see the benefit to yourself. And I've gotten feedback from folks who have taken these courses, and they absolutely delight in them. Just the chance to have a conversation like the conversations that you lead in these classes. I think sometimes just that. I mean, if you read enough mommy blogs, then you know that it can be difficult to sometimes just get a grown-up conversation. So to have that, and then to take it to that next level of, we're going to go back in time. We're going to go deep in thought. We're going to go wide, and we have an amplitude topically. Just to be able to have all of that richness I've heard from several parents like just how delightful they are, and it's just like $25. You get a 2-night pop of stimulation, and then something that can fuel you for the next little bit of homeschooling, for the next little bit of going into the office that you have to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think part of what we're also trying to do is by engaging these shorter masterpieces or classics or great books, and then having these live conversations, we not only are enjoying it at that moment and benefiting intellectually and spiritually, we also are equipping of sorts. I've had a couple parents say they've used some of the shorter readings that we have gone through for some of their high school students as either a devotional time, screw tape letters, or a part of a great book's philosophical read. Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy is a great piece, and it's shorter and relatively easier to digest than, say, Plato's Republic or Thomas Aquinas' his Summa. And so these shorter pieces are, I often say it's like we're still eating a great meal. We're still putting filet mignon out there, the very best of the best, but we're cutting it in smaller pieces, or we have a little smaller offering instead of trying to tackle something so grand. It would take months to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this course, it's on July the 13th, or July 13th and 15th, which is 2 weeks from the date of this recording. So I very much encourage the audience enroll, just participate in the class. You'll get your readings right away, and then we'll just be prepared to converse. That's it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I tell folks, if you come prepared, you come prepared if you come with either a few questions or some things you are perplexed by, things you don't understand, things you would like to discuss. You are ready for a class session.
Well, before we talk about the teacher certification stuff, which is kind of what we'll close the video with, you said something just before we started talking about the Cicero micro course and talking about all the different resources, just the richness of resources that are out there, both as far as media goes and human resources. And Scott Postma, a colleague of mine here at Kepler, and I recently were privileged to participate in a cooperative conference with folks involved with scholarly groups, with Classical Academic Press, some acquaintances of yours. So I wonder if you would be willing to speak to the classical Christian education environment and where it is, and maybe a little bit about like I am of Apollos, I am of Paul. Is that a thing that has to be dealt with? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
That is a great question. And of course, I'm coming just from my experience and my perspective. But what I would say is over the past 20 plus years that I have been involved in classical Christ-centered learning, I've seen more of a spirit of cooperation than a spirit of competition. When I interact with different people, whether it be with Circe or Society of Classical Learning, Kepler, ACCS, my interactions with all of them, every single person, including people who just are receivers of the blessings of these organizations, I have heard and picked up on a beautiful, a kind of a mere classical Christian learning, where even though there are different points of emphasis or stress within the different circles, and I like your image there of, I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos. There definitely are people who have been very much influenced, and often you can either hear them reference a person, a organization, or a book. And so you'll hear people talk about, Doug Wilson's Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning, or Little John and Evans' Wisdom and Eloquence, or the one book that we've seen it now in a couple of editions on the liberal arts tradition. There are those who speak very highly and favorably of norms and nobility, or of poetic knowledge. And what I think we ought to do and what we ought to see is not a competitive spirit, but very much like what Paul said about the church or about the kingdom of God. It is one. And ultimately, we are in this together. We are in this as comrades and as colleagues who should be edifying and building one another up, because we are in this battle together. There is a common enemy, a common foe. There's common opposition, and it is not us. And so that's what my experience has been, and I hope it continues to remain that way.
Yeah. And, I mean, because I paid enough attention in geometry class, I know that as we continue to advance, the front expands, and there's more to be done. So there's room for all of us, right?
Absolutely.
And there's room for parents to, equip yourself with this thing and that thing, and let's just keep growing this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think this part of the conversation segues nicely into what we're trying to do with the certification and the various tracks. One of the things, I think the number one objective for me in the track one is to expose the students, expose the parents, whoever is a part of that certification session, is to expose them to some of these great ideas and these resources. Often where I'm the headmaster, when I interact with prospective parents and families, they will say things like, so what's the difference between classical Christ-centered learning and generic Christian learning? Or if somebody says, well, it's my understanding is they're all kind of pretty much the same. What we do in the first certification track is we look at the history, philosophy, theology of Christ-centered classical learning to see how distinct and unique it is. We go all the way back to the ancient world, and we consider various authors and sources up to the modern world. The students within that program will also look at the trivium and the quadrivium and specific readings within the trivium and the quadrivium to be exposed to that. And then what we try to do in the other two tracks is we try to expose the students to the various rich offerings in terms of primary sources. And then what we want to also accomplish is, by the time if somebody does all three certification tracks, is that they will read a number of the great works within classical Christian education, specifically works over the last 25, 35, 40 years that deal with that. But students will also be exposed to Hugh of St. Victor or John of Salisbury. They'll hear about these great medieval writers. They'll be exposed to important Renaissance thinkers to see that the roots of Christ-centered classical learning run very deep and very wide. And so there is so much, or if we want to use a different image, a feast. I think what we've done in our certification tracks is we have tried to lay out a banquet here. We have a feast of delicious offerings that we want our students who are part of the certification program to benefit from by reading, discussing, and thinking through these things together.
So, who is, and I'm setting myself up to be knocked down when I ask this, but who is your student? Who's your archetypal student? Who's supposed to take this class, these certifications?
I would say, first and foremost, people who are genuinely curious or who want to know, want to understand. Any of us, myself included, who's been involved in classical Christian learning for more than 20 years, there's always something else for me to learn. And so I'm always reading new sources or exposing myself to new authors or resources that I didn't even know existed. And I also want the student who comes with that sense of curiosity, but also a sense of wonder. It is so rich and so invigorating when I see it here, students who come into this program, whether they know next to nothing about classical Christian learning or whether they've been doing it for 20 years, when they say things like, I didn't even know about this author, I didn't even understand, that's where this idea, this pedagogical emphasis comes from. Oh, wow. So there it is. So people who are curious, who have a sense of wonder, who are open to wonder, I think would do very well within this program. Or it could be somebody very much like myself, even after having received a PhD in humanities, I still am constantly in certification programs or am in opportunities of continuing education, professional development, where I want to keep learning. So that person who is a student, not just a parent or a teacher or a professional, but is a student and wants to be a student, wants to learn, those would be the people we welcome and know that they will be encouraged by.
Now, with these tracks, they operate independently, right? You could jump into track 2 or into track 3, later go back and do track 1 if you wished.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, the 1, 2, and 3 is just arbitrary, but the truth is, yeah, we have people who are set up for track 3 or track 2 or track 1. Yeah, you can start with either one. I would say you should start with, we don't offer all 3 every term. So we'll offer 2 tracks in the fall, 2 tracks in the spring, and then we'll alternate 2 tracks in the summer, but they'll constantly be rotating and alternating.
Well, I'd like to encourage viewers to go take a look on the site. We'll have links below, so you can go take a look at these courses, at these tracks. And I think you're going to find that the value is also particularly good. What you get for the price is pretty incomparable.
Yeah, we're hoping that folks will see the value in terms of intellectually, spiritually, pedagogically. They'll be able to benefit from what we're doing. Now, we will be adjusting some of the dates over the next few weeks. If they look at anything that has dates for track 1 or track 3 for the fall, those dates were for last year. And so we're going to go ahead and shift those. If they don't see dates, it'll just be, it's the same ordering of all 3 tracks that we had for last year.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Dr. Woods, I really appreciate you being here. And I hope that we get to have another conversation again soon.
Well, it's always my pleasure, and I appreciate you and all that you're doing.
Thanks so much.